Hello and welcome to a Team Moray Robotics event recap. On June 20th, 2026, I competed at Team Honeycrack's Air and Armor Combat Robotics Showcase with my Beetleweight combat robot, Deadite. This event was held at an air show near the Growing Stems facility and would be my second time running a Beetle. Let me remind you how my first Beetle event went. It went about as poorly as possible, drawing the eventual champion, Impact, in round 1, followed by Carmine. I hardly got to see what Deadite could do since I fought two very similar opponents, and I didn't really get to see what the weapon or armor could do since the top plate popped off. After this performance, I knew I needed to make some changes and ideally, more significantly test the robot before my next event. On April 11th, I was competing at Rabbid's April Annihilation, and I decided to bring Deadite as a plastic beetle to throw in a rumble. I did this before Motorama, and it clearly wasn't the most useful test, but it's always fun. I switched to using plastite screws to hopefully hold the top plate on better, since that was the main issue with the first version of the robot. In fact, I didn't want to change anything other than the screws I used to hold everything on, since everything else that failed was caused by the machine screws pulling out. Okay, that's not the only thing I wanted to change, because I wanted to use a battery with more capacity, no more floppy TPU bottom plate, and I made the holes on the armor mounts a little bit smaller, but the plastites were the only thing I felt like I absolutely had to change, and were definitely the biggest difference. I gave Deadite a Super PLA Plus sickle-shaped blade to make it safe for Rabbid's arena. This weapon should be more damaging than the last-minute TPU spinner I made for it the last time I did this. I also gave Deadite a rigid Super PLA top plate to go under the TPU one, so the servo wouldn't get pushed out. Deadite fought in a huge 11-bot rumble near the end of the tournament with all sorts of different robots. The robots consisted of Plastic Ants, Killshot V2, Next of Kin, Spurned Reminder, Nokia, Underpeel, and Ame no Habakiri. Fairyweight's Tire Terror and Wackus Bonkus, and Full Combat Ants, Atomic Nuke, and my dad's robot Baseline, not to be confused with the legendary Base P-Line, the plant version. Mostly for the sake of my sanity, I'm not going to recap this whole fight, but I will go over the highlights. When the fight starts, Ame no Habakiri immediately gets launched at the wall, and Deadite goes around pushing and hitting various robots before Wackus Bonkus is removed from the arena because it got destroyed. The fight continues, and Underpeel clearly wants to be hit by Deadite. Tire Terror tries its best to take on the Pleatle, a robot 9 times its size, so I rip its wheel off for trying. After more chaos, Deadite starts chopping through the back of Killshot V2, where after the fight I learned that I was dangerously close to a direct hit on his battery. Deadite chops Spurn Reminder's big foam wheel off, but for some reason my spinner cracked. This is all while the fairy tries to free Nokia from the wall.
Come on, Thomas, knock me back down!
The rumble comes to an end with a lot of robots still moving. Well, this would have been the end, but everyone just kind of kept fighting and the rumble continued.
There's still bots moving! There's still bots moving! That is not a complete rumble.
Deadite rejoined the rumble. I get a triple push, and I remember trying to get every remaining robot stuck on the wall or incapacitated in some way. Eventually, it gets down to Deadite, Baseline, Atomic Nuke, and Tire Terror, but my battery runs out and incapacitates the Pleatle. The rumble ends with only 3 robots kind of still functional, meaning a Fairy-Weight with 1 wheel outlasted my Beetle. Baseline beat Deadite. Well, that was a lot of fun, and I recommend watching the whole fight when I upload it separately because I didn't want to go over everything, but it was a very entertaining battle. Listening to what the drivers are saying to each other is especially funny. Deadite took no real damage besides its weapon. The spinner cracked, warped, and melted in a very strange way where it was still attached but all off balance. The weapon motor and battery were extremely hot after this fight as well. I still wanted to test Deadite before I went to Air and Armor, ideally against another Beetle. My test box is way too small to do anything other than test the weapon, and I only had limited space in my garage to drive it around without the weapon on. What I needed was a place to test the weapon while driving around where I could safely fight another Beetle. Luckily, I had been to a place that seemed perfect for that. Team Honeycracked is famous for having a full-size test cage that they can test their 12 and 30-pound robots in. I went to a hive event last year that was held at their facility, and I was extremely impressed by what they had access to. Their arena is at the Growing Stems building, so I emailed Growing Stems to ask about using their arena for a day. They put me in contact with Zoe from Honeycracked, who was happy to have me come test my Beetle. I didn't know this when I reached out, but Honeycracked encourages people to come use their facility to test. They charge $10 an hour for beetles and $25 an hour for bigger bots. The link to the Growing Stems website is in the description if you also want to test there. The only change I made to Deadite for the hive testing was giving it the servo I use in Outpost 31, which is much faster and more powerful than the previous one I used. It's a Palm Beach Bots 45 kg servo. This made Deadite's arms significantly faster, which should help with self-righting, delivering the weapon quicker, and aggressive tapping. At the hive, Deadite fought my dad's robot Drop Shot, which is the exact same as Deadite, except it has a lifter. This wouldn't be much of a test for Deadite's durability, unfortunately, since that was the main thing I wanted to test before an event, but it would be good for a few different things. I could see how well Deadite drives in an open space, and I could test my cheese blocks. Since Deadite is an overhead saw bot, this was the perfect way to test out how my anti-overhead armor works. I knew it could cut through TPU, but I was also curious to see what kind of damage Deadite could do to another robot. The kickplate was being replaced for Hive Hysteria to get rid of the moat, so they used pieces of it to form a smaller arena inside the big arena. There were some parts in there to hit around if we wanted to do that as well. Again, I won't recap the whole fight, but I will go over the key moments. Early in the fight, Drop Shot purposefully backs into Deadite so I can cut the cheese. The saw easily goes through the material, and I stop so I don't do too much damage. I quickly do the same thing again, and you can see how easily it was able to cut. After this, the saw stops working for some reason, and it turns into a pure control fight. I was disappointed the saw stopped, but it was surprisingly fun to have the two robots lift and push each other around. Dropshot had success pushing the lifter against the floor to lift Deadite with its forks, and Deadite had some fun with its arm. Deadite's wheels start to spin freely on the hubs, which makes driving harder. You can see them wobbling as the foam wheels get gradually more ground down by the spinning hubs. Suddenly, the saw starts working again when I try spinning it again, but it shuts off mid-cut. It was intermittent for whatever reason, and I didn't have an idea as to why. Right after the 3-minute timer went off, Deadite ejects its left wheel.
Oh no!
So that was a disappointment. It definitely proves why I wanted to test the robot before an event. Everything I was hoping would work didn't. Deadite's FingerTech foam wheels ground off the hubs because there wasn't enough of a keying feature on my custom hub design. A wheel could probably last a few fights before being unusable, but clearly they weren't something I should continue to run. Especially since Deadite relies on pushing and pinning its opponents, requiring as much torque transferring to the wheels as possible. The cheese block design was terrible because first of all, it didn't stop the saw from cutting into the back of Dropshot. Second of all, there was so little infill to save weight with how big they were that the walls for the mounting holes pulled out with very little effort. I needed to come up with a better top armor setup. At least the saw being intermittent was easy to fix. The top plate pushed down on the weapon ESC wires, enough to break one off from its connector. It was still hanging around in the same spot and brushing against it from time to time, which is why the motor sometimes spun. The solder connections weren't very good because I think I made them a long time ago. I've improved my soldering a lot since then, so this was an easy fix that shouldn't really happen again. The saw was effective since it cut through Dropshot's TPU forks and armor with no issue before the ESC wire disconnected again. I stopped sawing through the back near the beginning of the fight because I didn't want to damage the drive motor, but I probably could have cut much deeper if I wanted to. Overall, my testing at the Hive was a disappointment, but that's exactly why I did this in the first place. Without this experience, all that stuff probably would have happened during a fight. Big thank you to Team Honeycracked for letting me use their facility. In particular, I want to thank Zoe for setting this all up, and Joe of Dead Rise for being the cage manager while we were there. Okay, so now I needed to make new wheels and new top armor for Aaron Armor in under a month. Even before my testing at the Hive, I thought about making custom cast wheels like the Roach Robotics ones I use on my ant weights. The failure of the foam wheels sealed the deal for me that I would try casting my own. I had a good idea of how to make them, but after confirming my ideas with the NHRL Discord server and learning that Vitaflex is the standard material, I got to casting. I used mica powder to make the tread black, and the process of casting wheels was surprisingly easy. The traction and speed they gave Deadite was awesome, and it was definitely worth doing. Alright, this is the first ever drive test for Deadite with the new wheels. Perfect. I got new saws that should be better at cutting through aluminum and TPU. They should be able to deliver more of a quick Mako style cut rather than a slower cut like the previous grinding saws I was using. With new wheels, saws, top armor, which I'll get to later, and the option for a bigger battery, I played around with configurations to see what I could make weight with. After figuring out what configurations I would use against certain opponents, it was time to test the weapon. For some reason, the saw motor wouldn't spin unless I had the switch fully up, and even then it didn't always start right away. I didn't think this was a huge deal since it would get up to speed pretty quick, so I went ahead and tested it anyway. The first test went really well. You believe me, didn't you? I have these 1mm carbon fiber parts on either side of the arm to prevent the motor from melting the TPU and pulling the screws through, like something that happened in Motorama. They make it a little bit difficult to screw the motor to the arm and line up the holes, and I thought I had done it, but it turns out the screws scraped against the side of the motor's mounting piece instead. It was enough to hold the motor in place for a bit, but a forceful hit like that easily removed the whole motor. Look at the thread marks, this is so ridiculous. The good thing is, I thought this was the reason that the motor wouldn't spin correctly. I screwed the motor in properly and tested it again. I don't have footage of this, but it caught on fire. The motor burned up and forced me to rethink what I was going to do for this event. I don't remember every detail or the exact order of what happened because there was a lot to think about, but I'll do my best to explain my thought process. I couldn't find any obvious problem inside the robot, so I switched to a new but identical ESC and motor. If I remember correctly, the motor did the same thing where it only spun if I put the switch all the way to its maximum position. This led me to believe that there was a good chance another fire would occur if I used this one. I went and checked the motors that I bought off of Amazon and saw that they're rated for 2S while Deadite runs on 3S. This was an oversight on my part, obviously. I was also using only a 20 amp ESC, which doesn't seem like it's great for a Beetle saw bot. However, unless I'm forgetting something, the motor that caught on fire was the same one I used in both the Rabbid Rumble and the fight against Dropshot at the Hive, and it was the same ESC as well. I don't know why it suddenly struggled to spin up and caught fire, and the whole situation was pretty overwhelming as I had to decide what I would bring to the airshow event. I had 1 night and 3 days to figure out what to do with Deadite. Obviously, the current motors were not going to work, so I found motors with similar dimensions that are rated for 3S. However, with only 3 days, I didn't want to have to worry about the motors showing up in time, as well as having to assemble and test the whole setup. I made the decision to scrap the saw arm and make a lifter instead. My plan was to come back to the saw for the next event, which wasn't too far off. The lifter was super easy to design as I just used the same dimensions and mounting points for the base of the arm and designed a lifting arm using that information to start. I was almost glad the saw didn't work out because I actually felt a lot better about Deadite being a lifter. It makes the robot significantly less complicated with less moving parts and electronics, which made me think repairs would be easier. It's also less to think about during a fight, gets rid of any wheelie issues the saw had, and perhaps most interestingly, gives me a lot of extra weight. What would I do with this extra weight? Add more armor? No. Add a mini-bot. That's right, I figured out how much weight I had left over, weighed all the internals and wheels that I took out of baseline, and determined how much weight I had for a TPU chassis and top plate. And one night I came up with this, a 4-forked mini-bot so poorly designed it could get stuck on its back and sides extremely easily. To fix this, I put screws in it and now it looks like Pinhead. I also added 2 as wheelie bars so it wheelies a little bit less. The inner forks didn't touch the ground, so I used this high-tech setup to bend them into place by letting it sit with the weight on the forks for a day. It was pretty rushed, but I thought it might be able to at least give my opponents a bit of trouble. And if it got destroyed, it wasn't too big of a deal because I put some old tiny ESCs in it, which I don't use anymore. I named it Marauder after the creature from the end of Evil Dead Rise to fit the theme of the whole bot. Marauder was going to be driven by Douglas from Team Spark Botics, who was nice enough to print a spare chassis for it, and give me a mini drumstick at the event. After a big setback that caused me to spend a lot more time than I expected getting ready, Deadite and its new mini-bot were all set to compete at Air and Armor. This was the first time I brought 2 copies of a robot since beetles are a lot more destructive than ants, and I really failed to plan for that the first time I did beetles. I had one with the fork setup and one with the anti-horizontal armor, so that way one robot's already set up no matter what robot I'm fighting. I continued my tradition of putting a sticker on my rolling container the morning of an event, and then finally set out for the Air and Armor Combat Robotics Showcase. This was probably the most unique robot event I've ever been to because it was part of an air show on a military base, so there was a lot involved with getting there, and the setting was unlike any other competition. Once we all found where the arena was, we set up in an outdoor pit space, which was fortunately under a big tent. Sometimes a really loud plane would fly over, which I found funny. I had a really good time at this event, and it certainly stands out from all the rest. Going in, there was no one robot that I thought was clearly my worst matchup, but when somebody asked me, I said it was Actual Size. I didn't feel confident in my configuration for him, and I would rather fight something more conventional. Anyway, my first opponent was Actual Size. Oh, come on! This was nowhere near as devastating as seeing I had to fight Impact first round like my first Beetle event, but it still didn't feel great. Actual Size is of course a big wheel built by legendary Milkman Roastmaster Max Morningstar. I designed this The Wall Part 2 inspired armor to push him around and keep him from hitting me, but I made it out of TPU, a material known for its flexibility. After I printed the walls, I was confident they would just flop out of the way when Actual Size pushed into them, which is not what they were intended to do. I also underestimated how big he was and was worried it wouldn't be enough to control him much at all, especially with his stanced wheel. With some input from Kevin of Lifeline, I attached an old moray wheel guard to each side to make the wall a little bit less bendy. It wasn't much, but it was something. I also taped an old moray blade on top since I had weight left over from not running Marauder, who couldn't do anything against a big wheel. I went into this event with very low expectations, as it was only my second Beetle event, and I was seriously disappointed with my first one because I had unreasonably high expectations. I wanted to prepare myself for a weak performance, so I wouldn't leave overly disappointed, and fighting Actual Size right away, I was very much prepared to lose and just hope for a more durable robot. I was thinking I would be satisfied with it if I went into it with the right expectations. However, Actual Size was, I think, having electronics issues before the fight, and Max made it seem like the weapon didn't work very well at all. Suddenly, I was hopeful because fighting a weaponless big wheel didn't sound so bad. Oh, and the floor's yellow. When the fight starts, Deadite box rushes Actual Size, stopping his spinner and letting me slam him into the wall. I flip him, but flip myself and take a shot on the backside. Deadite gets hit into the air, and then Actual Size experiences problems with its weapon, but I fail to take advantage. My wall bends and I get popped back. Deadite's lifter gets caught in the spokes of Actual Size's wheel, allowing me to gain control. I hoped I could do this going in. My robot flips onto its face and then wheelies up under Actual Size. The wall works well enough as an awkward controlling device, but somehow the control bot gets pinned by the big wheel. What a fight. The wall isn't super effective at controlling him since I get flipped 3 times in a row, but at least Deadite hasn't taken any damage yet. Actual Size rips a piece of tape off, and I flop around some more. I poke the lifter into his spokes again, but can't do much before Deadite gets hit away. I successfully drive underneath Actual Size and get a lengthy stretch of control, complete with some aggressive tapping on his chassis. I release and come back in for a pin when Actual Size sits still. I assume this was due to electronics problems. Deadite releases early and goes back in for another pin. I hold it for the full 10 seconds, but have trouble releasing. The next exchange shows the wall working as close to intended as it was going to get, as it keeps Actual Size's spinner at bay before flexing too far. I slam into him a few times, get him stuck on top of the wall, and then end the fight in control. That was a strange, fun, and pretty close fight. Deadite ended up winning the judge's decision, giving me my first Beetle win. That was unexpected. So the wall was definitely too floppy, but it was good enough to be awkward for Actual Size, and it allowed me to push him around to an extent. Actual Size put up a good fight and started to swing the fight in his favor, but I think I did enough in the second half to take the win. It might not be clear in the way I recap it, but pretty much the whole second half of the fight was Deadite smothering Actual Size. There were plenty of moments where his weapon or drive stopped working, so I'm sure he would have won if he was working correctly. Not only did Deadite get its first win, it also didn't blow up. There was only minor, mostly cosmetic damage done to the walls, fork, and lifter. And Actual Size cut through my bottom plate. I was actually really happy he did this because it shows that my design worked exactly as intended. There was nothing on the other side of this section of bottom plate because I put an air gap there so I could hopefully survive most hits to the backside. He may have cut through the carbon fiber, but it didn't matter because there was nothing important there. Air gaps are my favorite way to keep my robots from getting destroyed. Max gave me an Actual Size sticker, which is now on my travel case. Deadite would surprisingly continue in the winner's bracket and fight Honeybadger, a wide vert from Team Honeycracked with a massive aluminum spinner. For some reason, I thought Honeybadger was an egg beater, so I rounded the edges of my forks really poorly before this one. After proving that it is possible to win in Beetles, I felt good about this matchup because my forks should counter a wide vert like this fairly well. I was going to go straight at Honeybadger since I had a reach advantage. I also wasn't too worried about the aluminum spinner since I haven't seen a lot of robots use something like that, and it shouldn't be able to slice through all my TPU like a blade would. This fight marks the debut of Marauder, which I was very excited to see in combat. I wasn't sure how it would do, but it looked like it would be a lot of fun. I used some clips here from Team Honeycrack's recording of the fight, and they have great recordings of every battle at this event on their channel if you want to watch those. When the fight starts, we both box rush Honeybadger, and Deadite gets a pin and flip while Marauder gets stuck on the wall. Honeybadger sucks Deadite's side forks in, but they hold up pretty well. I push Honeybadger across the box and into Marauder, which I hoped would free him, but somehow he's still stuck when I release. Honeybadger lands a small hit on Marauder and exposes its backside doing so, allowing Deadite to come in from behind and lift its opponent up. I slap Honeybadger for 10 seconds straight while Marauder gets stuck again trying to self-right. Finally, he gets free when I help him down, but Honeybadger tosses Marauder around. Deadite doesn't like that and pins Honeybadger for his actions. I immediately get another pin, shoving Honeybadger's gigantic spinner into the wall. Clearly I like the tapping. Deadite shoves Honeybadger across the box, and then inadvertently scoops up Marauder as well. Marauder gets under and stops Honeybadger before I pin both robots and start slapping them. Maybe I shouldn't have pinned Marauder too, because 2 of his forks get sucked into Honeybadger's weapon, causing the robots to go airborne. I'm pretty sure my tapping didn't help either. The bots were pretty stuck, so an unstick was needed.
That's a good entanglement right there.
You really sucked at fork.
Wow, you got both of them.
It should still work. You didn't get into the internals.
Yeah.
How long do we have on the clock?
Marauder's unkillable. He looked a little bit wonky now, but Marauder clearly still works since he tees Honeybadger up, so Deadite can come in for a smothering pin. This was a double pin, I guess. Even when Honeybadger's the aggressor, Deadite's fork design comes out on top, and I get another pin. Honeybadger does a backflip off my fork, and both robots have a hand in pushing our opponent into the corner, which leads to Marauder high-centering him. Exactly, if not right after the fight goes the distance, I make a very stupid move.
One! That's the match! Oh no, the motor's dead! He got the shot. Yeah, that was really insane.
I killed him. Actually no, Marauder still worked even though a giant beetle-weight weapon got flipped right on top of him. Deadite's lift flipped Honeybadger in a way where his spinner came down on Marauder's wheel and ejected the whole drive motor. Well, almost all of it. This is one of my favorite closing moments to a fight I've ever seen. That was a great Deadite fight, and was as close to perfect as I could hope for, honestly. Obviously, Deadite won the judge's decision, surprising me with a 2-fight win streak in the winner's bracket. Deadite did a great job of controlling Honeybadger with pins, pushes, and lifts. Marauder also came in handy a few times, getting up underneath Honeybadger and making it much easier for me to get another pin. Maybe the most surprising thing about Marauder was the fact that it held up really well. Getting ingested by a beetle weight only put a manageable bend in one fork and removed some material. It helped that Honeybadger's chunky spinner isn't a weapon meant for slicing through TPU, so he just bludgeoned Marauder around. The big climactic final hit only did serious damage to the motor. The switch was poking out of the robot but unharmed, and I don't even know what that is under the screw that pulled through. The motor experienced the big 1-2 as the shaft snapped off and the back popped off. But it was still plugged in. Deadite took minimal damage. The lifter had some scrapes from where I tapped Honeybadger's spinner, a TPU fork got ripped off, both front corners were ground down, and one metal fork was chipped. I don't know what this picture was supposed to be since that's actual size damage I'm pointing to. Sometimes I forget why I take certain pictures. I'm really happy with how the top plate had material removed instead of flying off like before. Overall, that fight's up there as maybe one of my favorites I've had with any of my robots. Now, Deadite was 1 win away from going home with a podium finish. Very unexpected given my expectations. I thought there was a good chance I might win my next fight because it was against a fellow control bot, Peekaboo, driven by Bob Melanson. It's a lifter where the whole front fork setup is attached to the lifting arms. I know that Peekaboo is a fantastic robot, but I thought I might give him a run for his money. Metal forks are a good counter to TPU forks like the ones Peekaboo was running, and I had a mini-bot that could hopefully give him problems and help out when Deadite gets pinned. Before the fight, we all agreed to limit pins to 5 seconds instead of the 10 seconds that were allowed in the name of entertainment. I think this makes sense given that the fights are only 2 minutes max. Bob said before this one that this fight would clear out the spectators. The only change I made before the fight was solder welding the TPU fork I lost back on. I did this because I think it looks funny. When the fight starts, I miss. Marauder gets flipped, but I pin Peekaboo and keep our 5-second agreement. Poor Marauder gets flipped again and gets stuck on the wall while Deadite controls Peekaboo in the corner. I make a mistake trying to free Marauder, which lets Peekaboo pin us. He throws both of us over his head on the release. Deadite and Peekaboo have a little back and forth before Marauder and I sandwich our opponent. This is one definite advantage to having a mini-bot. Even though Deadite's forks are under his, Peekaboo wins a pushing match, pushing Deadite up the wall. Marauder helps out by getting under Peekaboo when he tries to back up. He can't get flipped right side up even when the other robot tries. Never mind. Peekaboo flips around and then pushes Deadite again, even though my forks being under his should favor me. Marauder positions himself behind Peekaboo so that when he releases, he drives on top of the mini-bot. There's a little bit of friendly fire, and Peekaboo does a cool escape maneuver. While he's distracted with Marauder, I corner Peekaboo and pin him. It's easier to keep him there since he's backed into a corner and can't really wiggle free. Half of Deadite's drive dies for some reason when I release, which I knew was not a good look as this fight was nearing the end. Peekaboo drives under Deadite and gets caught in the corner before the fight goes to the judges. The functionality test shows that Deadite was down a side of drive, while Peekaboo was fully functional. Hey, Marauder self-righted. Well, that was a very close fight. We went back and forth, pinning and pushing each other around with a fairly even amount of control from both sides. With half my drive going down, I thought he was going to win the decision. Actually, you can even see me on video say he won that right after the fight ended. But this was the first time I've seen the judges consult a rule book at an event that I've competed at. That shows just how close this decision must have been. In the end, they did give the win to Peekaboo, which I fully agree with. I was very happy with how that went, even though I lost, because both Deadite bots put up a great fight against a top-notch opponent. I was right about my steel forks getting under his TPU ones, but I remember it being hard to square up and chase Peekaboo down. I thought my driving wasn't the best, but rewatching it now, it doesn't look so bad. Marauder was useful once again, getting behind Peekaboo to give him trouble releasing pins, and quickly preventing any one part of the fight from being one-sided. I didn't know why half the drive died, but a quick motor swap fixed the issue, so I assumed that drive motor just burnt out. They always get really hot after a fight, like actually too hot to touch, so this seemed like a reasonable conclusion to make. I think Douglas threw out the idea of putting the motors in the cooler before our next fight, which we didn't end up doing, but maybe we should have. Overall, I'm really satisfied with that fight, especially with how great of a robot Peekaboo is. Now in the loser's bracket, Deadite had to fight Lifeline, which is basically a larger version of Doomslug. Lifeline uses a huge motor to spin his saw, which allows it to cut through just about anything. In its first fight of the day, it cut all the way through 2mm AR-500, and it absolutely mangled actual size as well. It also did this once. Top armor is, highly encouraged when fighting Lifeline. Fortunately, I prepared what I thought was a pretty good top armor setup. I call it the aluminum sandwiches because it consists of TPU blocks mounted on the top plate, which then have aluminum plates mounted on top of them. The idea is that overhead attack bots cut through the aluminum with ease, but there's so much space between the plates and the top plate that nothing important gets hit. It's kind of like an evolution of the cheese block top armor. I had a lot of weight to work with, so I thought it might be a good idea. I felt really confident that Lifeline wouldn't be able to hit anything important. The only place I was worried about him sawing into is the space in between the two sandwiches, but if the arm started to come down in that area, I was going to try to use my lifter to keep it at bay. Sadly, the added top armor meant I didn't have weight to run Marauder. We did, however, have weight to run Douglas's fairy weight air jail with a steel moray blade taped on top. We quickly removed it from the arena after hearing that the fight would end if either one of our robots had its lipo catch on fire. It suddenly seemed like a terrible idea to send a fairy weight in against Lifeline. Lifeline had longer forks, so I needed to outdrive him in order to get control of the fight. When the fight starts, Lifeline gets under Deadite for the first few exchanges, making it hard for me to do anything. Some quick driving lets Deadite get around to the side and take control of its opponent. Lifeline effortlessly chops off two of Deadite's TPU forks while I have control. I love how he checks to see if he's going to hit anything before he actually does it. And look at what he did to the floor. Deadite takes control again, pushing Lifeline across the arena and into the wall while he saws into my AR-500 fork. It cut pretty deep. I perfectly drive to the side of Lifeline and pin him where I use the lifter to try and stop his arm from coming down. Lifeline takes control and instantaneously cuts through the aluminum, but the armor does exactly what I designed it to, since his saw couldn't reach anything important. He pushes Deadite and keeps sawing, but it can't make it past my armor and lifting arm to cut into the vulnerable parts. The saw stalls completely before Lifeline cuts into the exact same slit he made a few seconds ago. Deadite stays in control during this, and Lifeline inadvertently cuts into the kick plate while getting pinned. I hoped this might happen since there was a chance it could get him stuck or the motor would burn out. Deadite lifts Lifeline up for another pin, and his saw is in the perfect spot where it can't hit anything other than my armor. We dance, and the gyro from spinning the saw lets Deadite get under Lifeline and pin it. Smothering the other robot while getting sawed into just looks so cool. In the last 5 seconds, Lifeline flips around, ending the fight strongly in Deadite's favor. Well, that would be true if half my drive didn't die again right at the last second. Lifeline flips himself and struggles to get back upright, but that was after the fight ended, so it didn't count for anything. Up until the very end, I felt confident that Deadite had this fight. However, the drive issues at the end made me feel a lot less sure and made the fight a lot closer. This was another one where the judges pulled out the rulebook and took a while to make their decision. In the end, the winner was Lifeline. I was a little disappointed I lost and was out of the bracket, but I got over it very quickly since that was another incredible fight. I think this was even more in Deadite's favor than the Peekaboo one because I clearly pulled ahead in the later part of the fight. Rewatching it, I can't exactly say if I agree with the decision or not, since Deadite won on control fairly convincingly, Lifeline won on damage, and aggression was pretty split, I guess. I think I would give Deadite the edge in aggression since I was engaging a lot, but the drive side going down really messed me up because Lifeline got a lot of points from that. Combined with the fact that control wasn't entirely one-sided, this decision was a tough one. I used to favor Deadite in it, but now I don't know. The most annoying part is that the damage that swung the fight in Lifeline's favor was just a random motor failure. My best guess was, again, that it burnt out from the heat. I mean, they were insanely hot, and they started to melt some of the TPU a little bit, and I'm sure it didn't help that the robots were trapped inside a clear outdoor box for that fight. Since it was so hot outside, the motors didn't really have time to cool down in between fights like they would usually, so they were just kind of always warm, which I'm assuming is what ended up causing this issue. Nothing other than the motor was damaged beyond use. The top armor worked perfectly with only some material removed from the front armor and top plate. The saw he uses is designed to cut through aluminum, so it's no surprise it cuts straight through. He didn't cut through the left side aluminum because I think Kevin said he was spinning the saw at a slower speed as the match went on to avoid running out of battery. He also might have lost some teeth from sawing into my fork, which had an impressive channel cut into it considering the material. I lost parts of 2 TPU forks and the lifter was sliced open from trying to block the saw. It was another great match that I'm super happy with, all things considered. This might be my favorite Deadite fight now. Deadite was out of the tournament, but I did do one grudge match. Now with Deadite though, it was with Marauder in a 3-way plant rumble. I fought against my own Minibot driver who ran Drumstick, as well as a horizontal called Newberry that was originally designed by Nick, who is responsible for Gold Line. If I recap this whole fight, I guarantee every single one of you watching this would never come near this channel again because it was a horrible fight. I bound Marauder to my transmitter for this, but didn't have enough time to set up a mix. In fact, I was trying to create one that worked cage side. I ended up with a robot that went forward and backwards just fine, but could only turn using the right wheel. So I had to spin around with that one wheel until I faced another robot. Then I could drive into them, but if I missed, I had to pivot on that one wheel again and try the whole thing again. Drumstick started off with a good hit, but then died immediately. He kinda came back to life for a little bit, but then died again. Newberry's weapon never worked, so it was one drumstick hit and then a pushing match between a robot that's not even mildly designed well to push, and a 280-gram Minibot that can only turn using one wheel.
The losers are everyone who had to watch that match.
So that's it. This event exceeded my expectations by a long shot. Deadite got its first 2 wins, including one against a veteran competitor, even if his robot wasn't at 100%. My losses were also really good fights that left me feeling great about Deadite's chances at future events. The losses were to the 3rd place finisher and the runner-up, and if it weren't for how hot it was, maybe I would have won one of those. Marauder was also a lot of fun and quite effective. Thank you, Douglas, for driving it. You did a great job. I was taking Deadite to Rabbid's first ever Beetle event in less than a month, and I did want to try getting the saw working again, but this event was so fun that I did consider keeping it as a lifter with the Minibot. You'll have to wait until that video to see what I ended up deciding, but for now, thank you for watching. I think we were all very tired after this event.